anytime I do a webinar or a training, I like to start with what we call an opening and inclusion activity. And so I thought long and hard about this one today. And what I'd like to ask of you is that you give me one or two adjectives that describe your child. Again, nothing that would tell us who they are, but just some adjectives to describe them. So I will go ahead and get started. I am the mother to a 7-year-old first grader, and my two words for him would probably be stubborn and curious. I'll give you a second to think. I'm seeing words like smart, curious, funny, creative, kind, beautiful, sensitive, insecure, loving, funny, empathetic, gorgeous, witty, perceptive, sensitive, brave. Ooh, what a good one. Headstrong, creative, determined, nurturing, strong-willed, and goofy. I feel like those could describe my child too. Headstrong, inquisitive, sweet, funny, smart, loving, outgoing. Well, your children sound wonderful. Thank you for sharing them with me. All right, let's get started. One of the absolute most common misconceptions, and I dare say probably the reason that we don't see parent counseling and training used more in IEPs, is that there's a broad misunderstanding of what it is and what it is not. So I always start this presentation with what it is not. It is not counseling services. It is not psychological services. It is not rehabilitation counseling. So in IDEA's list of related services, it includes multiple options for these counseling services, okay? But they're all defined separately in IDEA, and they're all different from one another. So parent counseling and training is not to be confused with other forms of counseling that we may find in an IEP. And when I present this to the field, I think the most common thing I hear is, I'm not qualified to provide counseling. Our teachers say that, our related service providers say that, our support staff say that. And so I'm bringing you this presentation with an ask for grace for some of these teams, because as long as this related service has been around, so many of them still have never heard of it, and they are frightened by it. And so you may hear them say, we don't offer that here, or we're not qualified to provide that. And my answer to that is, yes, you absolutely are qualified to provide it. In fact, you're the best person to provide it. So we will get to the definition of what it is. Now, this is from North Carolina policy. North Carolina policy mirrors federal IDEA policy. So if you look at the two policy books, they're going to be the same. And in North Carolina, parent counseling and training means three different things. Number one, assisting parents in understanding the special needs of their child. So when we think about how, if you had a child who was born to you who had autism, that may be the very first person in your entire life that you've ever encountered that has autism. So one of the things that teams could potentially help with is helping you understand what that might look like for your kiddo and how that might manifest. Number two is providing parents with information about child development. If you are new to having children, you may not know what is considered typically developing. You may not know what is developmentally appropriate. So one of the things that schools can do is to help you with that information. Number three, I think, is probably one of the more compelling pieces of this policy. and that is helping parents to acquire the necessary skills that will allow them to support the implementation of their child's IEP. I would care to bet that at least one of you has walked into an IEP meeting and there's a team of professionals at the table and they're having a lot of conversation about specific strategies they're going to use and specific tools they're going to use. And these might be things that you have never seen or heard of before. And so this part of policy would definitely apply to that sort of situation where we want parents to learn how to do what we do when we're providing direct services. A little note about this as a related service. As with any other related service, parent counseling and training is provided to parents if the IEP team determines that it is necessary for the child to receive their provision of FAPE, which is their free and appropriate public education. So, depending on the child and what sorts of skills are being addressed, different data sources would need to be considered for different children. So, we don't provide a blanket list of these are the things that you have to have in order to get this service, but we do encourage teams to look at all data sources to make that determination. So we've talked about what it looks like in policy. Now we're going to talk a little bit about what it might look like in practice. It can look different for every child. There's no set recipe for what parent counseling and training looks like. But in many instances, we may be seeing it similar to parent coaching. So what we know about parent coaching is that it is evidence-based and it is interactive and it follows a specific process that facilitates adult learning. Okay. The whole purpose is to assist parents and families in understanding the needs of their child and also to support implementation of the IEP. So we're going to talk more about the benefits of this model a little further in the presentation. But for some of our families who have previously participated in early intervention, this could look like a continuation of services and support similar to what you had before. For children receiving services under Part C, which is that early intervention side, the goal is to provide interventions through consultation and education to the family in order to build the family's capacity to support the development of their child. And so the concept, especially of that third piece of policy, is very similar. Our goal is to build your capacity to work on the behaviors and the skills that we need addressed outside of school, at home, when you're with them, when we are not. So for the next few slides, I'm going to give you some data. This part maybe is a little boring to you, although I find it really interesting. And we're going to look at what the data looks like for this service in North Carolina. So when we first pulled the numbers in May of 2020, we had a total of 19 students across the state of North Carolina receiving the service. We have hundreds of thousands of children, and so to see that 19 was a little concerning. If we fast forward a little bit, this data is not on the screen for you, but if we fast forward a little bit, we pulled the numbers again in September of 2020, and at that time only 15 students had the service. And of those 15, 9 of them were labeled either hearing impaired, deaf, or deaf-blind, which is about 60% of those kiddos. Now, if you remember, that's my area. And so I can tell you that parent coaching has been a known practice with exponential benefit in the field of hearing loss for many years. So this is something that we've seen a lot in the field of deaf and hard of hearing. But even with that being the case, we still were not seeing it used regularly in our schools, even for children with hearing loss. So this data told us that parent counseling and training was an underutilized tool for providing quality instruction to students with disabilities and supporting their families. So we got to work on informing service providers across the state on the IEP team's necessary consideration of this use as a related service. So fast forward September 2021, it's about a year later, and our grand total is at 33. Although this seems like a small accomplishment, I was thrilled that our numbers had pretty much doubled in a year. I mean, doubling 15 is not as impressive as other numbers, but I was excited. We also added a few more categories, which I think is an important piece of this conversation, considering the fact that we do see this happening more with deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind. To see the category growth is exciting. So fast forward again to March of 2024. Now, at this point, I have presented this presentation probably 20 times. We've done it at the Conference on Exceptional Children here in North Carolina. We've done it with individual teams. We have done it actually nationally with OSEP. We've done it a lot of different places. And so our numbers are now up to 117, which again, we've added multiple new categories to the count. And so that's very exciting to me. You may note on here that there are 6 children at the bottom there that says 504, not eligible or unknown. And they don't have an identified category. So these kids are a little bit of a mystery to us. However, when we look in our reporting system, we know we can answer a few questions. So we know some of them were found eligible for an IEP, or excuse me, were not found eligible for an IEP and are getting the service under a 504, which was new to me. I had never heard of that before. Some children were found eligible, but the parent declined services, so they decided they did not want that. And then there's still a few that we need to take a closer look at to figure out how they fall into that unknown category. But 117 is growth, and we've added, gosh, I think maybe 5 or 6 new categories at this point. So we have almost every category represented. And I will say the recommendation to consider the service continues to be a part of the regular technical assistance that we provide to the field when we get questions. We are also looking at focusing really heavily on EC directors, related service providers. So those would be like speech, OT, PT, as well as early childhood providers and early intervention in preschool. So we're working on different avenues of spreading the word. And again, I ask of you to just give your school teams a little bit of grace. I know that it can be extremely frustrating to be advocating for something and you just keep hitting a wall. So we're going to give you some resources at the end that you can use to have a conversation with your school team. But I do want you to know that this continues to be a service that school teams are just really unsure about. They don't know how to do it. I saw the question about when to do it. Staffing is different than it's ever been. We know that the impacts of COVID continue to ripple across the country and especially our state of North Carolina. So, we bring the information with resources and just ask that you continue to have these critical conversations with your IEP teams. And we are optimistic that the numbers will continue to grow. Okay, so next I'm going to share with you the stories of a few students in North Carolina who have had parent counseling and training as a related service and the impact that this service has had on them. So all of their names have been changed to protect confidentiality, but these are real kids. So we will start with Tamika. Tamika was a first grade student who had been identified as eligible for special education services under the category of speech language impairment. She was using an augmented system to communicate, so she was using a core vocabulary board, but she had become very proficient with that system and she was ready to move to a more sophisticated electronic device. So the IEP team determined that she was ready to move to this device and that those that were supporting her were going to need some training on how to facilitate its use, including her family. The IEP team met and determined that parent counseling and training services for the parents were needed and would be provided by the speech language pathologist to help the family become familiar with how the device worked, how to program it, and how to use it for communication across home environments. So at the time of our last update, we were told that this was an ongoing process because the utility of the device continues to expand as she becomes more proficient with it throughout her day. The parents had actively participated in training sessions, both prior to and during COVID and now after COVID with the device. And Tamika continues to expand her vocabulary, her pragmatic skills, and situations where she actively uses the device to communicate. So one instance we might consider the use of parent counseling and training is a situation like this, where the family needs some additional training on the assistive technology that the child is using at school. So this is our second example. This is Tony. Tony is a recent high school graduate, was a senior at the time that this presentation was written, and has been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. He was diagnosed when he was 4 after moving here from another state, so it's a little bit of a late diagnosis. His mother shared that although they suspected a diagnosis of autism before 4, they were just really not ready to hear it, which is completely understandable. He began receiving speech services at 2 because he had delays with spoken language. And at 2.5, his therapist confirmed that there was a need for further evaluation. And so he was evaluated around his 3rd birthday. And right around that time, he started attending a part-day preschool within the local school system. Later, he moved into a full-day blended setting where he received services for speech therapy, occupational therapy, and he spent his days with a certified birth to kindergarten teacher. During his time in preschool, his IEP team determined that parent counseling and training was required 1 time a week for his family to better understand his special needs and development and to help them acquire the skills that would allow them to support implementation of the IEP. So all 3 of those policy throngs. His parents began meeting weekly with service providers, and those services continued until early elementary school. And at that time, the IEP team, including his parents, determined that parent counseling and training was no longer needed because they had the skills necessary to help him support or to help them support implementation of his IEP. They communicated that they felt very confident moving forward, and so the service was removed. So, following the removal of parent counseling and training as a related service, his family continued to implement many of those skills that they had learned through the service, and he continued to show progress. In middle school, he was able to begin placement in a co-taught resource setting, and this placement continued in high school. As a high school senior, Tony showed interest in computer technology and engineering, and he was focusing on that pathway during his high school studies. When she was asked about his future, her mother said that although Tony doesn't know exactly what he wants to do yet, she knew that his pathway would be different than that of his brother and his other same age peers. And she stated, "He just doesn't know yet, and that's okay. I don't know either, but we will figure it out together." Um, we asked Tony's mother for a quote. I'm going to pause for just a second and let you read what's on the screen, and then I'm going to read the entire quote to you. Okay, so when asked about the impact of parent counseling and training, this is a direct quote from his mother. Preschool was a time of such great uncertainty and anxiety for me as his mom. And having ongoing communication with his teacher, his SLP, and his OT, that's his occupational therapist, was extremely helpful, not only in giving me the tools and resources to work with him, but also in shaping the way that I saw him and his education. I think that as parents of a young child who is not meeting milestones, you often have nowhere to look for guidance except to maybe your pediatrician or other parents. And since they are usually basing opinions on typically developing children, it can make you feel like you are facing huge obstacles. In working with his teacher and with everyone else at the school, the communication was always so positive and strengths-based that I felt like maybe it was going to all be okay. I learned from them to break it all down into small tasks where there could be incremental growth that I could see and be proud of. And because I felt like part of the team, it empowered me to provide teachers with my input on things. And I think that showed his teachers that I was invested in collaborating, which empowered them to communicate more with me about things I could do with him at home. There was a cycle of trust and respect that I believe his teacher started with us in preschool. And every time I read this quote, I get like emotional because I was a preschool teacher prior to this position. And I saw families go through the fear and go through the overwhelm and those feelings of isolation. And so um, I love her testament to this service. I think it's pretty powerful. All right, last example for you. Um, this is Miguel. Miguel was born with a profound bilateral sensory neural hearing loss, and that means that he really was not able to hear much at all. To a Spanish-speaking family that had no history of hearing loss anywhere in their family. He got bilateral hearing aids, which were never worn, and at 1 year of age, he received a cochlear implant, but his family had a lot of difficulty in putting it on him every day. It was a real challenge for them. He underwent 3 years of early intervention with little to no progress in terms of language development. And when he entered preschool at 3, he had no known functional vocabulary or language. He was frustrated, and his family was frustrated too. His preschool team determined that parent counseling and training was necessary to ensure parent education and home follow-up. They had already had some training, but they needed continued support. So this kiddo had typical cognition, and he was placed in a blended preschool classroom, getting multiple hours of service per day. And I happen to be his teacher. So if I told you that parent counseling and training with this family was easy, I would be lying. And I think this is important to note because a lot of times when I meet with providers, they say, I don't know how to do it. I don't know what to do. It's intimidating. And I get that. It is intimidating. But this family came to every single session. However, oftentimes his mom did not want to participate. So she wanted to watch. She would have her other children participate, but she didn't want to participate. And sometimes she left in tears, and I left in tears. And we worked very diligently for several years in learning how to better understand and support this family. Their parent counseling and training sessions, although at times really challenging, allowed his mother and I to bond. And his mother began to feel safer, and she more easily expressed her feelings of grief around his diagnosis. And that helped us understand why they were having such a hard time with technology, why home carryover was so hard. It opened a lot of eyes in terms of understanding that. After another couple of years of working towards listening and spoken language, our team decided to shift into a manual communication mode at the recommendation of his teacher and his audiologist. His mom was apprehensive about this, but she trusted that we were making the right choice because we had not seen a ton of progress. And so together we decided that it was time for a change. And so, with parent counseling and training and support from the team, his mother started learning sign language. Excuse me. So, fast forward a few months. For the first time in 5 years, this kiddo is using language to communicate. It was super exciting to watch that light bulb go off. And his mother continued to be reluctant to practice in front of us, but she did ask for resources at home. We created an online dictionary for her. We sent books home in Spanish. We taught her how to read to him using sign, and we had weekly vocabulary lessons in sign. It was never really clear how much mom learned from the lessons. I never walked away feeling super confident, but we saw him making progress, so we knew we were on the right track. He was set to transition to kindergarten, and his mother continued to feel concerned about needing support, so the team determined that he continued to need weekly parent counseling and training to support success during transition. So, in 2020, he entered kindergarten during a pandemic and began remote instruction. Here's what we heard. Something shifted with mom. She attended and participated in every single online teaching session. She communicated with him in signs. She used her voice. She commanded his attention by using the strategies that she had learned in her coaching sessions. And at this point, he is actively participating in all of his settings. He is mainstreamed. He is with typically developing peers in a classroom. He does still get services. And all that. At times, he still gets frustrated. He uses his language to communicate his frustration. He's been witnessed signing with his sisters and his parents. He's now talking. His family is communicating back to him. He's now also reading. So he's a success story of the power that this service can hold. And not every story of parent counseling and training is the same. And we know that how parents respond to their child very often depends on a lot of different factors, and it's individual to every single parent. But what we do know is that parent counseling and training is an opportunity to form a partnership between a school and a family. It's an opportunity to educate each other, to inspire, and to empower. And it can have a really profound and meaningful impact on families and teams who need support. So, in addition to the examples that we have discussed, parent counseling and training can be used to address a variety of needs. This might include behavior intervention, social emotional learning, progressive sensory losses in which a student is losing their hearing or vision, transition times when families and students may need individualized specific support on a certain skill or goal area, or even specific academic skill development if that's an area of specially designed instruction on the IEP. So decisions on what areas to target really should be data-driven and student-specific. However, we encourage teams to consider how parent counseling and training might facilitate access to the student's IEP and his or her free and appropriate public education. All right, now we're going to talk about the ins and outs of implementing this service for students and families. All right, we'll start with what we know. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Okay, there's a little iceberg picture in the top right corner of your screen because this is just the very basic of what we know. Number one, research shows better outcomes for children in early intervention programs when a family-centered approach is used that supports and empowers parents in their role as the child's primary care providers and addresses the priorities of the family. We are more likely to get buy-in from you as the parents if we are working on things that are a priority for you. Okay. Also, you are with your child way more than we are with your child, right? And you have a lot of good information that we need to know, and vice versa. So we need to acknowledge as providers that you are the primary care provider, and that when we center services around that, we have better outcomes. My voice is falling apart. I'm sorry. All right, number 2. Brown in 2012 found that coaching strategies that provided opportunities for an active parent role were associated with higher parent implementation of intervention strategies, and responsive parent communication strategies yielded stronger relationships with child communication than modeling alone. What does that mean? It means that when we coach and interact with parents, rather than just sending home a one-pager or a worksheet, we will get better parent implementation. Anybody ever gotten something from your child's school and you look at it and immediately feel overwhelmed and then you just put it to the side and you don't ever revisit it? Does that happen to you? As it happens to me. And so this research tells us, yes, Brittany says yes. This research tells us that when we pull parents in and make them active participants, we get higher levels of implementation. Okay. Number 3, we know that parents are the agents of change. Now, I'm going to be real honest with you. Professionals don't really like to be told that. And I say that as a professional, but you are the agents of change. You're with your child more than we are. You know them better than we do. You are the agents of change. So in most family-based intervention models, we see the practitioner disavow that expert position and sort of take more of a coaching position. So rather than I'm the expert and I'm going to tell you what to do and here's what you do, it's I'm going to be beside you as your coach and I'm going to help enable you to sort of act on the perspective that you're the one that's going to have the impact here. You're the agent of change. So that's a very foreign concept for most of our school age providers. But parent counseling and training offers sort of a continuation of this early intervention model, which we know is successful for children. Number 5, also super important, I think, for school systems to hear is that research tells us that when parents and educators work together in a collaborative partnership, positive student outcomes result. And that, and I think this is the critical piece, working closely with parents can inform us on the best use of and maximize the effectiveness of evidence-based practices. Okay, so what does that mean? Teachers and related service providers have a set of evidence-based practices that we know work with certain disabilities. So for example, I consider myself an expert in working with children who are deaf and hard of hearing. You, however, are the expert in your own child. You know your child better than anybody else in the entire world. So I can throw evidence-based practices at a child all day long, but if they're not relevant to that family's culture or the way that that family functions, they're not going to be effective. I will give you a very embarrassing example because I think it's an important example to note. For children who are deaf and hard of hearing, we very frequently spend a lot of time working on nursery rhymes. There's higher level language structures in nursery rhymes that don't find themselves in daily conversation. They work on prosody, they work on rhythm. There's lots of reasons to do them. And so I spent probably a year working on them with a child whose family was from Mexico. And then a year in, finally, the parent said to me, you know, I understand that this is important, but this is just not something that we do in our house, and it's not something that's important to our culture. And I said, really? Tell me more about that. And she said, no. She said, you know, we don't really sing nursery rhymes. She said, we do sing karaoke a lot. That's something that we do often. And I said to her, hey, look, I just need you to sing so we can sing whatever you want. So a prime example of I'm using an evidence-based practice that's really not appropriate for a family. But because we have parent counseling and training in place, mom is able to say to me, this is not a good fit for us, but karaoke is a good fit for us. And so we started singing songs that the family would normally sing during a karaoke session because it was more relevant to them. And we saw faster progress. So again, this is but the tip of the iceberg, but research shows us again and again and again that parents have to play a prominent role in order to get best outcomes for kids. We can see that even from these few sources of research, that including parent counseling and training has long-term positive effects on our students with disabilities and their families. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. So, as you've seen from the research, the potential benefits of working with a family are really endless. But here we're going to discuss more in depth some of the key potential benefits that can arise from parent counseling and training as a related service. So, number one, families of students with disabilities who are receiving this service can potentially gain a better understanding of their child's disability and overall development, which can help families know what to expect during the growth and development of their child. If you have a child with autism and that is the very first person you have ever met with autism, you may not know what to expect, and you are probably going to have a lot of fear around that. And so this is an opportunity for us to kind of build some understanding there. This service can help families set realistic goals because they can understand what is age appropriate and also what is within the potential for their individual student. So in turn, this enables parents to be better informed members of the IEP team, and it makes them equal players and it facilitates the productivity of IEP meetings. I'm curious in the chat, if you are a parent, I would like to hear how many of you feel like you are an equal member of your child's IEP team. Just give me a yes or a no. So I've got a lot of yeses, which makes me happy, but I also have a lot of no's. And I have some sometimes, depends on who is present. Oh, that's powerful. Yes, but I had to fight for it. Right. So one of the benefits that we really try to emphasize is that when parents know what is expected and when parents know what is being worked on and parents know the direction that we're going, they're more likely to feel like equal team members. And that is absolutely a benefit of parent counseling and training. We also know that parents who come to the table knowing what to expect are more comfortable and they're less likely to be unnecessarily stressed or defensive when they're speaking to an IEP team. Anybody ever been completely blindsided by an IEP meeting? Yep. Yep. I coach a lot of teachers, and I tell the teachers that I coach that if a parent is coming to an IEP meeting and is leaving surprised, we're doing something wrong. It should not be that way. Some more benefits. Families who are regularly learning about their child's disability and how to best support them tend to experience decreased stress and more self-confidence. They know what to do to help their child be successful. They're integrated into the team. So much so also that if they don't know what to do, they know who to ask. I get calls all the time. Who's your child's teacher? I don't really know. Who's your child's speech pathologist? I don't really know. Who is this person? I really don't know. That's a problem. It's a huge problem. Um, oh, okay. one of you shared not blindsided, but I felt like they did not know what to do with him and they wanted me to come up with everything, including goals myself. And wow, what pressure to put on you. But I would argue that if you were receiving parent counseling and training, lots of conversations leading up to that IEP meeting could have provided them some really good insight into what your thoughts were and vice versa. Um, Another really cool thing that happens from provision of this service is that parents can then, in turn, feeling very empowered in their knowledge, skills, and abilities, help other parents who have children with similar experiences. So, we know that for many of our parents, that grief cycle continues to cycle for years and years, and that can be a really significant hurdle for some families. And so having that support is really priceless. I like to give the example that once I showed up to an IEP meeting and and two of my parents were there, and one of them was a parent to an older child, about maybe third grade, and one of them was a parent to a preschooler who was getting ready to transition. And I walked in the room and was completely confused. I said, "Wait, am I in the right place? What are you doing here?" And she said, "We met in Target 2 months ago and realized that we had the same teacher. And so I'm here just to sit beside her and hold her hand and be a friend during the conversation around transition." And I have never been more thrilled in my entire life. That was so exciting to me. Um, so I think that's awesome, and everybody needs that. We've already talked a little bit about IEP meetings, but we have also seen that parents getting the service are better able to participate in meetings. Many tend to really need less explanation and understanding around goal progress because they've been part of that progress all along. So I would have families say, "I don't need to go through all this. I know exactly where we are. I know exactly where we're going. I'm good to move forward." And so everybody at the table felt comfortable moving forward and everybody was confident in what we were doing. So, um, yes, agree. We try to advocate that because you all are working with your child regularly, you know how the child performs, you know what skills remain challenging, that this conversation and collaboration is critical because you are also critical sources of information on skill carryover. So I can work on 10 new vocabulary words at school and I can see how they're being used at school, but I'm not at home. I'm not at soccer practice. I'm not at the YMCA pool. You are, and you can tell me whether or not those words are being used outside of my classroom. And that is a critical source of data. So, all of these benefits, are you sold yet? I mean, it feels like a sales pitch, but it's true. All of these benefits combine to create potentially more productive meetings with equally knowledgeable team members who can facilitate faster progress on skill acquisition. So, the benefits abound. Now, unfortunately, there is no decision tree here, okay? There's no standard score criteria. There's no list of you have to meet these data points to get the service. So what we have done is provide teams with about maybe 6 or 7 guiding questions. And I'm going to share them with you here. So it should be considered as a related service if the IEP team, including you as members of the team, determine that these services are required to assist the child to benefit from special education. So decisions related to the necessity of the service have to be individual to the student, but student teams can consider these questions. So number one, is there data to suggest that the parent or family may need further support in understanding the special needs of their child or child development? That's that first little piece of policy that we talked about. Do the parents or family need information or assistance in acquiring the necessary skills that would allow them to support the implementation of their child's IEP? That's that third little prong. And then the sub question there kind of is, how do we know? What do we see that would suggest that? How would carryover of these skills at home affect progress of skill development? So, especially with language development in our world of deaf and hard of hearing, we know that there is a critical window of opportunity. And if we miss that window, learning a language does not become impossible, but it becomes significantly harder. So, how would effective carryover of these skills across all settings facilitate the speed of which we're trying to obtain that goal? That's a question to think about. Okay, additional questions. Is the parent or family asking for further support? Seems like a no-brainer data source, but it's not always. But if you show up to a meeting and say, I don't understand how to work on this, I don't know what we're doing, I don't know what to expect, that's a data source. Okay. Is the team already providing support and training to the family in relation to the skill? And if so, is the support appropriately documented on the student's IEP? This is important. Okay. So I present this a lot and I hear from teachers, well, it's not on the IEP, but I do parent coaching every week, or it's not on the IEP, but I do, parent classes twice a month. If you have decided that that service is required for the child to benefit from their special education, then it needs to be documented on the IEP. And the reason is because if that child were to move, let's say, for example, your family lived in District A and something happened and you had to move over to District C, District A might offer parent coaching, District C might not. If it is on the IEP, then District C is required to offer it. Okay. So even if you might be getting it now and it's great, if it's not in the IEP, that would be something to advocate for. Because if you ever do have to move, or if the structures of the county change, or if another pandemic happens, gosh, let's hope not. But if something changes, if it's in the IEP, then they're legally bound to it. Okay. So I would advocate for that. Last question, is a similar support already available via other community resources or agencies? Maybe so, and maybe that's a better fit, and that's fine, okay? That doesn't necessarily mean you have to or have to not provide it, but it could be that maybe you don't need parent counseling and training. Maybe you need this class that's offered at this other place for free for families, and that would be a better fit, okay? That's the conversation for the IEP team. Okay. Here's where we kind of get to the putting the pieces together of this service. And this may or may not be as relevant to you as it is to a school system, but I'm going to share it with you just so you'll have all the pieces. The implementation of this service, again, may not be well known to all service providers. Okay, so it is somewhat normal to be met with that sort of deer in headlights, I don't know what you're talking about face. Because of that, I would recommend as a parent that you maybe raise it before the meeting, not to have it predetermined, but to say, here's a resource. I'm planning to discuss this during the meeting. I'm going to bring it up to give them a little bit of time to sort of read up on it if they haven't already. Okay, that could be one strategy that you use. Once the formal team meeting is happening, if an IEP team determines that parent counseling and training has to be provided in order for a student with a disability to benefit from special education, then this as a related service has to be described in the student's IEP and provided by the school district for free. Okay. Making decisions about how often a related service will be provided, where it's provided, by which discipline, all of those details are a function of the IEP team. You all have to hash that out together. Parents can initiate the process by requesting information, doing a referral, asking for assistance, and developing skills that will allow them to support the implementation of the child's IEP. So you can ask for the service in the IEP meeting. Remember that the purpose of parent counseling and training is to assist the parents, you, in understanding the special needs of their child. providing them with information about child development, and helping them acquire those skills to support the implementation of the IEP. Those 3 pieces of policy. And therefore, all of the skills addressed during the service should be IEP related, and the decision should be made in partnership with you, the parents. Okay. So we're looking at the IEP and we're saying, what goals here do I need to learn how to implement? And that's what we're going to work on. Okay. Or what devices or assistive technology is being used that I need to learn how to support? And that's what we're going to work on. And you can have more than one provider. So providers of parent counseling and training can include special education staff, teachers, speech language pathologists, audiologists, occupational therapists. It might include a school psychologist. It might include a social worker. It might include a nurse. Those would be a little bit more rare, but it might. And you can have more than one provider. So if you in our world of deaf and hard of hearing, I did the bulk of the services, but my SLP would cycle in occasionally. And we just documented all of that on the child's IEP in the prior written notice. Okay. So I did already say this, but your school district may not charge you for this service. It is free under IDEA. The IEP team is intended to work collaboratively with parents, functioning as equal partners in the development and implementation of the IEP. And because of that, parent counseling and training as a related service should not ever be imposed or forced on you by school personnel. So a situation where they say, you come to this parent counseling and training session or else is really not appropriate. So the IEP team offers their provision of FAPE. If for some reason you miss a session, you just communicate and that gets documented. It should never be forced upon you. Okay. Let's see. Parent counseling and training services should be focused on student-specific goals. Okay, so think about the goals that your kiddo has on their IEP. You would focus it there. And it may include examples like education around your child's specific disability, identifying community resources that are related to your child's needs, collaboration in regards to the implementation of the child's IEP, and that might include instruction or demonstration of techniques that are used in school to promote consistent use in home. And this is where that little coaching, that sort of coaching model comes in. Services should be focused on supporting specific student goals. And while most often the services are probably provided face-to-face, they could also be provided through other methods like phone or Zoom or written lessons if appropriate. And if that's what you need to access it. So sometimes we have to get a little creative. I had a mother who sort of kept me on standby. She said, I'm managing 2 different fast food restaurants right now. I cannot come to these as they are established, but I will let you know when I get a day off. And she would message me and say, I'm off tomorrow, and I would find a way because I needed to get with her. And then otherwise I might communicate with her over phone or via Zoom. We might have a flipped session where I'm with the child and we Zoom her in. Lots of different ways it can be structured. That, again, really is up to the IEP team. All right, we are nearing the end. So in conclusion, the sustaining factor that keeps most of us as professionals in the field is a passion for working with kids. We love children. We are inspired by them. We are impacted by their perseverance. And, if you are here as a professional, perhaps you had a particular student or situation in mind today that you're now thinking, maybe we need to think about it for this student or that student. This is a passion project for me, and it is my genuine hope that by giving this information, that we can see higher levels of implementation of parent counseling as a related service, and that in turn, that's going to directly impact student outcomes. So we've already seen a lot of strong interest from the field in response to the work that we've done thus far. And as you saw earlier, the use of the service is growing, however slow, it is growing. So this work really continues to serve as a welcome reminder that teamwork and collaboration are critical for obtaining the best possible outcomes for our students. All right, now for the resources. So I'm going to show you. We have developed a one-pager, which is super helpful for you to print or have digitally to bring to an IEP meeting. The one-pager comes in English and Spanish, so it has been translated. It has information about parent counseling and training. It has the policy definition. It has some questions for the team to consider, and it has some benefits. And then the second page really might be a little boring to you, but it's all of the references that we use to kind of compile this work. So if you're interested in the research, it's there for you if you'd like to read it. And again, we do have that in Spanish as well. Okay. Yes, I can drop it in. Hold on just a second. Oh wait, let me give you there's the one pager folder. Okay, secondly, you're going to get a recording today, I think, right, Brittany? They'll get it posted somewhere.
It may
However,
be Tuesday when the recording goes out.
okay, but it will go out. In the interim, if you need this information faster, we do have it already recorded. Now this, I will tell you, is like the very original. So it's the OG parent counseling and training webinar recording, but it has been recorded. And if professionals watch it, they can also get a CEU, which is really exciting because everyone loves CEUs for licensure. All right, that is it from me. I'm going to go back to this page so that you have a chance to kind of grab that if you need to. And then we can open it for questions that are not very specific.
Thank you so much, Jenny. This is such wonderful information and it's much needed by our audience. I just wanted to say as well that all of the links that Jenny has shared with us will be included along with the recording in the follow-up email in case you have any difficulty accessing them or can't save them at this time. I will send it to you. And with that being said, because ECAC and DPI alike are federally funded organizations, I will be posting a poll if our attendees wouldn't mind just to fill out that poll for us. It really helps a lot because our funders just like to see how we're doing. And if you could answer this poll in the meantime, we will take any lingering questions. I think that did it. So I see right now in the Q&A, there's just two things. And fortunately, the first one is a big thank you to you, Jenny. So I'll go ahead and read it aloud. Thank you for this information today. I do think parent counseling and training is happening across our state, but it's inconsistent and not getting written into IEPs. Having this information helps with establishing intentionality and clarity for the provision of these services and supports for families and children. Thanks again.
Awesome, thank you.
Someone is curious to know if Miguel's mother learned ASL or if you thought about including SSL, which I believe to be Spanish Sign Language.
That's a great question. I am not fluent in Spanish Sign Language. We focus mainly on actually not true ASL, but conceptually accurate signed English, which is ASL signs, but in English word order. When we talked about all of the options, that was the one she chose. So that's the one we went with. And I will say that every session that we did together had a Spanish interpreter present. Even though mom did know some English, we included an interpreter just to cut down on miscommunication. But no SSL.
That helps with the consistency across the board between home and school for the student as well. let's see. Do we have, so I see a question in the chat. How do we get our CEUs for this? ECAC does not provide CEUs. I can send out a certificate of attendance. I don't know if that's something that DPI would be providing.
Yeah, Shannon, I'm assuming you're a professional in the field that is asking about CEU for teacher or therapy licensure. So I'm going to include, I'm seeing more questions roll in. Shannon, that last link that I posted for you is where you can go to take your little, it's like a 5-question quiz. It's not hard. And as long as you pass it with 80%, you'll get your CEU. Okay. So I see a question from Megan. It seems like all students with disabilities could benefit from this related service. Amen. How do you determine if it's required? I think that's a really hard question to answer because it really depends on a lot of different factors. I would encourage you all as a team to go through those questions. And if the answer to any of that would point you in the direction of yes, it's needed, then it's needed. And I think it should be a lot more students than what we currently see, which is why we're trying to get the word out. I believe I've had 2 teachers comment about when you do this. So as an EC teacher overwhelmed with students and services, I'm still curious when I would fit in the training. Is it outside of school hours? Now, I'm just going to say I was a teacher of the deaf for a decade before I came here. So I get it. I totally get it. Caseloads are higher than they have ever been. And frankly, most of our teachers and service providers are, if not already burnt out, really nearing burnout. And that's a huge concern that we have. So I think the first answer is that you have to work with your local administration to find out when they would be comfortable with you providing the service. And the second thing I'm going to say is that as a teacher, my hours were 8:45 to 4:45, or somewhere around in there. Our students arrived at 9:15. Then we had a part day dismissal, and then we had an end of day dismissal. I usually scheduled my parent counseling and training sessions for either the 30 minutes before school, the 30 minutes at part day dismissal, or the 30 minutes at the end of the day. And then, depending on if it's a well-established meeting time that you can work in to your schedule, then you could work it in during school day because it's part of your implementation. But I would say that you need to work with your local administration to figure that out, especially if it's going to cause you to go over your hours at all, because that's a conversation you'd have to have locally. I see your question, Jessica, or your comment, Jessica. It is, in fact, part of the federal IDEA, so it does exist here. Could there be stipends for teachers and other professionals? I mean, I think, again, that really falls to a local decision. North Carolina is a local control state, and so a DPI cannot set forth any sort of rule or provision for that. And this goes back to sort of that feeling of burnout or of teachers are continuously asked to do more with less, do more with less time, do more with less resources. And I hear that and I know how frustrating it is. So if you as a professional need a thought partner or somebody that can kind of help you troubleshoot some of this within your team of professionals, I'm happy to help with that. And I don't have all the answers, but I'm happy to help kind of talk through what that could potentially look like if your district is looking like they want to sort of build this up. I'm happy to do that. Any other questions, Brittany?
I'm not seeing any other questions. We will hang around for a moment or two longer if anybody has any other lingering questions. Thank you all so much for your participation in the poll. And I did just want to reiterate that all attendees will receive a certificate of attendance from ECAC. But if you do need CEUs, please follow the link that Virginia has posted in the chat. It's important to note that distinction.
Yeah. A big thank you for all of you coming here and sharing about your children. being vulnerable about your frustrations and your caseload. And thank you especially for dealing with me as I lost my voice multiple times. Please do reach out if you have questions and use those handouts. They'll they'll be good conversation starters.
Yes, and also a huge thank you to you, Virginia, for joining us today and presenting this information. It was so helpful. I have put my email address and Virginia's email address in the chat. If you have any more specific questions, please feel free to reach out to either of us. Looks like we may have one more question. Students with AAC
Yes.
and are learning a new device, should we be offering parent counseling services or have parents work specifically with the company of the device to learn it?
I would push on this a little bit to ask if it has to be an or if it could be an and. I'm not familiar with how a company would provide that. One thing to remember, though, is that third piece of policy when we're talking about supporting parents in the implementation of the IEP. Part of what the school system is going to be working on is that functional use of communication with that device. And so, in that regard, the IEP team probably has a lot of critical information that the parent needs. But there's nothing to say that you can't do both.
Great question.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, that looks like it's about it for us today. I want to thank you guys again for joining us today, and thank you so much, Virginia, for presenting for us. I will be following up within 2 business days with a follow-up email, recording, resources shared, and the certificate of attendance. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.